Hello and welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Wyenberg. This time we'll continue our reading of The View from the Stars by Walter M. Miller, Jr. We continue with Blood Bank. Our hero has been journeying toward the far-off system of Sol, that is to say, the solar system, and has had to stop for repairs at a place called Tregor 3. The pilot called Tregor 3 and received instructions to set an orbital course to await inspection. All foreign ships were boarded before being permitted to land. A few hours later, a small patrol ship winged close and grappled to the hull. Roki went to manipulate the locks. The captain and two assistants came through. The inspector was a young man with glasses and oversized ears. His eyebrows were ridiculously bushy and extended down on each side of his cheekbones. The ears were also filled with yellow brush. Roki recognized the peculiarities as local evolutionary tendencies, for they were shared also by the assistants. Tregor 3 evidently had an exceedingly dusty atmosphere. The captain nodded a greeting and requested the ship's flight papers. He glanced at the pink pre-flight, clucked to himself, and read every word in the dispatcher's forms. Observation flight to Sol? He addressed himself to Roki using the interstellar Esperanto. The girl answered, "That's right, let's get this over with." The captain gave her a searing head-to-toe glance. "Are you the ship's owner, woman?" Daleth Incorporated contained her anger with an effort. "I am." The captain told her what a Tregorian thought of this by turning aside from her and continuing to address Roki as if he were the ship's skipper. "Please leave the ship while we fumigate and inspect. Hor will make you comfortable in the patrol vessel. You will have to submit to physical examination, a contagion precaution." Roki nodded and they started out after the assistant. As they entered the corridor, he grinned at Daleth and received a savage kick in the shin for his trouble. "Oops, sorry," she murmured. "One moment, sir," the captain called after them. "May I speak to you a moment?" They both stopped and turned. "Privately," the captain added. The girl marched angrily on. Roki stepped back to the cabin and nodded. "You are a well-traveled man, Roki?" the bushy-browed man asked politely. "Space has been my business." "Then you need no warning about local customs," the captain bowed. "I know enough to respect them and conform to them," Roki assured him. "That's a general rule. But I'm not familiar with Tregor 3. Is there anything special I should know before we start out?" "Your woman, Roki. You might do well to inform her that she will have to wear a veil, speak to no man, and be escorted upon the streets at all times. Otherwise, she will be wise to remain on the ship in her quarters." Roki suppressed a grin. "I shall try to ensure her good behavior." The captain looked defensive. "You regard our customs as primitive?" "Every society to its own tastes, Captain. The wisdom of one society would be folly for another. Who is qualified to judge? Only the universe, which passes the judgment of survival on all peoples." "Thank you. You are a wise traveler. I might explain that our purdah is the result of an evolutionary peculiarity. You will see for yourself, however." "I can't guarantee my companion's behavior," Roki said before he went to join Daleth, "but I'll try my best to influence her." Roki was grinning broadly as he went to the patrol vessel to wait. One thing was certain, the girl would have a rough time on Tregor if she tried to have him jailed for mutiny. Her face reddened to forge heat as he relayed the captain's warning. "I shall do nothing of the sort," she said stiffly. Roki shrugged. "You know enough to respect local customs. Not when they're personally humiliating." She curled up on a padded seat in the visitors' room. He decided to drop the subject. Repairing the synchronizers promised to be a week-long job, according to the Tregorian inspector who accompanied the idiot upon landing. Our replacements are standardized, of course, within our own system, but parts for SSC ships aren't carried in stock. The synchronizers will have to be specially tailored. Any chance of rushing the job? A week is rushing it. All right, we'll have to wait. Roki nudged the controls a bit, guiding the ship toward the landing site pointed out by the captain. Daleth was in her cabin, alone, to save herself embarrassment. May I ask a question about your mission, Roki, or is it confidential in nature? Roki paused to think before answering. He would have to lie, of course, but he had to make it safe. Suddenly he chuckled. I forgot for a moment that you weren't with 60 Star Cluster. So I'll tell you the truth. This is supposed to be an observation mission officially, but actually our superior sent us to buy him a hold full of a certain scarce commodity. The captain grinned. Graft and corruption were apparently not entirely foreign to Tregor III, but then his grin faded into thoughtfulness. On Saul's planets? Roki nodded. This scarce commodity, if I'm not too curious, is it Surgibank supplies? Roki felt his face twitch with surprise, but he recovered from his shock in an instant. Perhaps, he said calmly. He wanted to grab the man by the shoulders and shout 1,000 questions, but he said nothing else. The official squirmed in his seat for a time. Does your federation buy many mercy cargoes from Saul? Roki glanced at him curiously. The captain was brimming with ill-concealed curiosity. Why? Occasionally, yes. The captain chewed his lip for a moment. Tell me, he blurted, will the Solarian ships stop for your patrol inspections? Roki hesitated for a long time. Then he said, I suppose that you and I could get together and share what we know about Saul without revealing any secrets of our own governments. Frankly, I too am curious about Saul. The official, whose name was Weejan, was eager to accept. He scrawled a peculiar series of lines on a scrap of paper and gave it to Roki. Show this to a helicab driver. He will take you to my apartment. Would dinner be convenient? Roki said that it would. The girl remained in her quarters when they landed. Roki knocked at the door, but she was either stubborn or asleep. He left the ship and stood for a moment on the ramp, staring at the hazy violet sky. Fine grit sifted against his face and stung his eyes. You will be provided goggles, suitable clothing, and an interpreter to accompany you during your stay, said Weejan as they started toward a low building. But Roki was scarcely listening as he stared across the ramp. 1,000 yards away was a yellow-starred mercy ship bearing solar markings. The most peculiar thing about it was the ring of guards that surrounded it. They apparently belonged to the ship, for their uniforms were different from those of the base personnel. Weejan saw him looking. Strange creatures, aren't they? He whispered confidentially. Roki had decided that in the long run he could gain more information by pretending to know more than he did. So he nodded wisely and said nothing else. The mercy ship was too far away for him to decide whether the guards were human. He could make out only that they were bipeds. Sometimes one meets strange ones out all right. Do you know the Quinjori from the other side of the galaxy? No, I believe not, Iroki. Quinjori? Yes, very curious folk. Very curious indeed. He smiled to himself and fell silent. Perhaps before his visit was over, he could trade fictions about the fictitious Quinjori for facts about the Solarians. Roki met his interpreter in the spaceport offices, donned the loose garb of Tregor, and went to quibble with repair service. Still, he could not shorten the promised time on the new synchros. They were obviously stuck for a week on Tregor. He thought of trying to approach the Solarian ship, but decided that it would be better to avoid suspicion. Accompanied by the bandy-legged interpreter, whose mannerisms were those of a dog who had received too many beatings, Roki set out for Polarin, the Tregorian capital, a few miles away. His companion was a small, middle-aged man with a piping voice and flaring ears. Roki decided that his real job was to watch his alien charge for suspicious activities, for the little man was no expert linguist. He spoke two or three of the tongues used in the 60 star cluster, but not fluently. The Kofian decided to rely on the Esperanto of space and let the interpreter translate it into native Tregorian wherever necessary. How would Roki care to amuse himself? The little man asked. A drink? A pretty girl? A museum? Roki chuckled. What do most of your visitors do while they're here? He wondered quietly what in particular the Solarian visitors did, but it might not be safe to ask. Uh, that would depend on nationality, sir, murmured Pock. The true human foreigners often like to visit the Wanderer, an establishment which caters to their business. The evolved human and non human visitors like to frequent the Court of Kings, a rather peculiar place. He looked at Roki doubtfully, as if wondering about his biological status. Which is most expensive? He asked, although he really didn't care. Because of the phony observation mission papers, he could make Colonel Beth foot the bill. The Court of Kings is rather high, Pox said, but so is the Wanderer. Such impartiality deserves a return. We will visit them both, Epoch, if it suits you. I am your servant, Eroki. How to identify a Solarian without asking? Roki wondered as they approached a sticky. How to identify a Solarian without asking? Roki wondered as they sat sipping a sticky, yeasty drink in the lounge of the Wanderer. The dimly lighted room was filled with men of all races. Pygmies, giants, black, red, and brown. All appeared human, or nearly so. There were women among them, and most of them removed their borrowed veils while in the tolerant sanctuary of the Wanderer. The Tregorian staff kept stealing furtive glances at these out-system females, and the Kofian wondered about their covetousness. Why do you keep watching the strange women, Epoch? He asked the interpreter a few minutes later. The small man sighed. Evidently you have not seen Tregorian women. Roki had seen a few heavily draped figures on the street outside, clinging tightly to the arms of men, but there hadn't been much to look at. Still, Pock's hint was enough to give him an idea. You don't mean Tregor 3 is one of those places where evolution has pushed the sexes further apart? I do, Pock said sadly. The feminine IQ is seldom higher than 60. The height is seldom taller than your jacket pocket, and the weight is usually greater than your own. As one traveler put it, short, dumpy, and dumb, hence the purda. Because you don't like looking at them? Not at all. Theirs is our standard of beauty. The purda is because they are frequently too stupid to remember which man is their husband. Sorry I asked. Not at all, said Pock, whose tongue was being loosened by the yeasty brew. It is our tragedy. We can bear it. Well, you've got it better than some planets. On Java, for instance, the men evolved into sluggish, spidery little fellows, and the women are big, husky brawlers. Ah, yes, but Sol is the most peculiar of all, is it not? Said Pock. How do you mean? Roki carefully controlled his voice and tried to look bored. Why, the Vamir, of course. Because of the fact that Pock's eyes failed to move toward any particular part of the room, Roki concluded that there were no Solarians in the place. Shall we visit the Court of Kings now, Epoch? He suggested. The small man was obviously not anxious to go. He murmured about ugly brutes, lingered over his drink, and gazed wistfully at a big, dusky Sanbei woman. Do you suppose she would notice me if I spoke to her? The small interpreter asked. Probably. So would her 5 husbands. Let's go. Hawk sighed mournfully and came with him. The Court of Kings catered to a peculiar clientele indeed, but not a one, so far as Roki could see, was completely inhuman. There seemed to be at least one common denominator to all intelligent life. It was bipedal and bimanual. Four legs were the most practical number for any animal on any planet, and it seemed that nature had nothing else to work with. When she decided to give intelligence to a species, she taught it to stand on its hind legs, freeing the front feet to become tools of the intellect. And she usually taught it by making it use its hands to climb. As a Kofian biologist had said, life first tries to climb a tree to get to the stars. When it fails, it comes down and invents the high C drive. Again, Roki looked around for something that might be a Solarian. He saw several familiar species, some horned, some tailed, scaled, or heavily furred. Some stumbled and drooped as if Tregorian gravity weighed them down. Others bounced about as if floating free in space. One small creature, the native of a planet with an 8-hour rotational period, curled up on the table and fell asleep. Roki guessed that 90% of the customers were of human ancestry, for at one time during the history of the galaxy, man had sprung forth like a sudden blossom to inherit most of space. Some said they came from Sol 3, but there was no positive evidence. As if echoing his thoughts, Pock suddenly grunted, "I will never believe we are descended from those surly creatures." Roki looked up quickly, wondering if the small interpreter was telepathic, but Pock was sneering toward the doorway. The Kofian followed his tipsy gaze and saw a man enter. The man was distinguished only by his height and by the fact that he appeared more human in the classical sense than most of the other customers. He wore a uniform, maroon jacket and gray trousers, and it matched the ones Roki had seen from a distance at the spaceport. So this was a Solarian. He stared hard, trying to take in much at once. The man wore a short beard, but there seemed to be something peculiar about the jaw. It was predatory, perhaps. The skull was massive, but plump and rounded like a baby's and covered with sparse yellow fur. The eyes were quick and sharp and seemed almost to leap about the room. He was at least 7 feet tall, and there was a look of savagery about him that caused the Kofian to tense, as if sensing an adversary. "What don't you like about them?" he asked without taking his eyes from the Solarian. "Their sharp ears, for one thing," whispered Pock as the Solarian whirled to stare toward their table. "Their nasty tempers, for another." "Ah, rage reactions show biologic weakness," said the Kofian in a mild tone, but as loud as the first time. The Solarian, who had been waiting for a seat at the bar, turned and stalked straight toward them. Pock whimpered. Roki stared at him coolly. The Solarian loomed over them and glared from one to the other. He seemed to decide that Pock was properly cowed, and he turned his fierce eyes on the ex-patrolman. "Would you like to discuss biology, man-thing?" he growled like distant thunder. His speaking exposed his teeth, huge white chisels of heavy ivory. They were not regressed toward the fanged stage, but they suggested, together with the massive jaw, that nature might be working toward an efficient bone crusher. Roki swirled his drink thoughtfully. "I don't know you, Bristleface," he murmured, "but if your biology bothers you, I'd be glad to discuss it with you." He watched carefully for the reaction. The Solarian went gray-purple. His eyes danced with fire, and his slit mouth quivered as if to bare the strong teeth. Just as he seemed about to explode, the anger faded, or rather settled in upon itself to brood. "This is beneath me," the eyes seemed to be saying. Then he laughed cordially. "My apologies. I thought to share a table with you." "Help yourself." The Solarian paused. "Where are you from, man-thing?" Roki also paused. They might have heard that a Kofian commander blasted one of their ships. Still, he didn't care to be caught in a lie. 60 star cluster, he grunted. "Which sun?" The Solarian's voice suggested that he was accustomed to being answered instantly. Roki glowered at him. "Information for information, fellow, and I don't talk to people who stand over me." He pointedly turned to Pock. "As we were saying, I am of Sol," growled the big one. "Fair enough. I am of Kof." The giant's brows lifted slightly. "Ah, yes." He inspected Roki curiously and sat down. The chair creaked a warning. Perhaps that explains it. Explains what? Roki frowned ominously. He disliked overbearing men, and his hackles were rising. There was something about this fellow. I understand that Kofians are given to a certain ruthlessness. Roki pretended to ponder the statement while he eyed the big man coldly. True, perhaps. It would be dangerous for you to go to Kof, I think. You would probably be killed rather quickly. The angry color reappeared, but the man smiled politely. A nation of duelists, I believe, military in character, highly disciplined, yes. They sometimes serve in the 60-star forces, eh? The words left no doubt in Roki's mind that the Solarian knew who had blasted their ship and why, but he doubted that the man had guessed his identity. I know less of your world, Solarian. Such ignorance is common. We are regarded as the galactic rurals, so to speak. We are too far from your dense star cluster. He paused. You knew us once. We planted you here, and I feel sure you will know us again. He smiled to himself, finished his drink, and arose. May we meet again, Kofian. Roki nodded and watched the giant stride away. Poke was breathing asthmatically and picking nervously at his nails. He let out a sigh of relief with the Solarian's departure. Roki offered the frightened interpreter a stiff drink and then another. After two more, Poke swayed dizzily, then fell asleep across the table. Roki left him there. If Poke were an informer, it would be better to keep him out of the meeting with the patrol officer, Captain Weejan. He hailed a cab and gave the driver the scrap of paper. A few minutes later, he arrived before a small building in the suburbs. Weejan's name was on the door, written in the space tongue, but the officer was not at home. Frowning, he tried the door. Locked. Then he glanced back toward the street and caught a glimpse of a man standing in the shadows. It was a Solarian. Slowly, Roki walked across the street. Got a match, Bristleface? He grunted. In the light of triple moons, he saw the giant figure swell with rage. The man looked quickly up and down the street. No one was watching. He emitted a low animal growl, exposing the brutal teeth. His arms shot out to grasp the Kofian's shoulders, dragging him close. Roki gripped the molten automatic in his pocket and struggled to slip free. The Solarian jerked him up toward the bared teeth. His throat about to be crushed, Roki pulled the trigger. There was a deep chug. The Solarian looked surprised. He released Roki and felt of his chest. There was no visible wound. Then, within his chest, the incendiary needle flared to incandescent heat. The Solarian sat down in the street. He breathed a frying sound. He crumpled. Roki left hastily before the needle burned its way out of the body. He hadn't meant to kill the man, and it had been in self-defense, but he might have a hard time proving it. He hurried along back alleys toward the spaceport. If only they could leave Tregor immediately. What had happened to Wee Jan? Bribed, beaten, or frightened away? Then the Solarians did know who he was and where he was going. There were half a dozen men around the spaceport who knew, and the information would be easy to buy. Pock had known that he was to meet with Weejan, and the Solarian had evidently been sent to watch the captain's quarters. It wasn't going to be easy now, getting to Sol 3 and landing. What manner of creatures were these, he wondered. Men who supplied mercy cargoes to the galactic nations, as if charity were the theme and purpose of their culture, yet who seemed as arrogant as the warriors of some primitive culture whose central value was brutal power. What did they really want here? The Solarian had called him Man-Thing, as if he regarded the Kofian as a member of some lesser species. The Solarians were definitely different. Roki could see it. Their heads were plump and soft like a baby's, hinting of some new evolutionary trend, a brain that could continue growing, perhaps. But the jaws, the teeth, the quick tempers, and the hypersensitive ears, what sort of animal developed such traits? There was only one answer: a nocturnal predator with the instincts of a lion. You shall get to know us again, the man had said. It spelled politico-galactic ambitions, and it hinted at something else, something that made the Kofian shiver and shy away from dark shadows as he hurried outward. And we'll follow Captain Roki as he tries to figure out the Solarians, certainly not our kind of Solarians, next time.